a new
Sure.
link. Kev, do you want to just quickly
Yes, sure. Short idea. Okay. So there's actually two ideas, but I will give the one tomorrow night. So in this week's Parshat Vayera, um, uh, it's the story, a few interesting stories as they are in the whole book of Bereshit. But the one interesting story is where Lot and his daughters flee after Sodom is destroyed, and his wife turns to a pillar of salt because she looked behind when she shouldn't have, and they were in a cave. They were hiding in a cave, and they thought they were the only people left in the world. And his daughters felt it was the right thing to populate the world, so they got their father drunk on consecutive nights, and one had relations with him on the one night, and the other, and they both bore children. And it seems like in a Western way of thinking that it's a bit perverse, but it's not. They had these people who were on a different level. We can't judge them or relate to them on our terms. So they had kids, and one of them, Moav, from the one daughter, became the father of Mashiach. He had a son, Boaz, who married Ruth, and Ruth gave birth to the Mashiach. So there were so things in life may not be as they seem, especially what happens in the Torah and the Chumash, and we can't relate it or judge it on our terms on because it's very limiting, and we don't understand the level of these people and that the purity of their intentions.
good?
God,
And I think, Kevin, that's a good point, is that, although what makes Judaism different from many of the other religions is that we look at both the forefathers and our prophets and various personalities through the Jewish world, and we say they weren't perfect, they made mistakes and they did things right. But the thing of it is, we've got to be very careful to criticize them as if we somehow holding at a better level, and realize that at the end of the day, God never spoke to us, and if He does, we've got schizophrenia. There's more serious problems, and that we've got to be on a
Yeah.
level where we show them a huge amount of respect, whilst knowing that they're not perfect. It's not that they never sinned and they've got this almost JC-like perfection to them, as if it's mythology. They're real people with flaws and real historical characters, but we have to go with awe and trepidation when we criticize them and just say, according to what the Chumash said in this area, they needed to work on that, etc. But we have to deal with it very respectfully. And it's a good point you brought. I'm
And
going to send a new link.
all leaders, even our current leaders and the
Um,
incumbent American presidents have flaws, and a leader has flaws. There's no perfect al We can't compare them to
no,
the
we can't even compare the
forefathers.
two with respect. And the reason being is that if you
Yeah.
look at the Rishonim and the Tanaim, and even when you look at people like the Hafetz Chaim and the Vilna Gaon, just a different level. We can't even imagine what a lifetime of dedication to God is, where you're a proper servant of Hashem. I wouldn't exactly put today's modern politicians in that category. In fact, they might be comforting each other in Gehinnom, and we don't know. The modern politicians, I wouldn't believe a word out of their mouth. It's like, all right. So, just want to go through the bottom line is that at the end of the day, what we were trying to do is we were saying that where do we actually derive this principle that the Cohen is not stripped, the if the Adam Zimmerman were Kohanim, why they're not stripped of their kahuna? We understand why Israel is not stripped of it, because he's going to get lashes, not the reciprocal penalty. But if it's a Cohen and he planned to have somebody else's Cohen status removed, why isn't he stripped of it? What's actually the problem? So the Gemara says that basically there are two reasons. The first reason that we always try and do before we have a logic is we say scriptural sourcing trumps logic. Um, so we have to discern, as we said yesterday, the difference between Chumash sourcing versus Tanakh sourcing, and then the writings and the and various other commentaries like the prophets, where it's certainly a proof, but it's not overwhelming like the Chumash, which is a rule book. So, we what did they say? Bottom line is when you were looking at Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish in Devarim chapter 19, verse 19, it states, "And you shall do to him as he planned." So what does this imply? The penalty should be applied to him, but not to his offspring. But if we were just to disqualify the Eindim Zomimim, what does that actually mean? That it would carry off to his children as well. And then Lance brought up an excellent point is maybe this rubbish of a plotting witness, which is a terrible human being, doesn't give two hoots about the Cohen's child losing his status because he was quite happy to strip this Cohen of his status, and therefore his children would be affected. So why shouldn't they get the reciprocal penalty, which is a fair enough argument, except there are two retorts to it. The first retort was very simply that um, most cases, when you have a vendetta, it's against the person themselves and not against the children. It might happen to affect the children, but it's generally directed towards the person. You do have exceptions, but most normal people, as bad as they are, dislike a particular person, but not innocent children that might be 3 and 5 years old. That's one aspect. And the other aspect of is saying, just say that Lance is right, and this is a particularly disgusting human being that actually wants this guy's children to also somehow be punished. The reality is this Adim Zomimim, the conspiring witnesses or witness, their children do not deserve to suffer because their parents are wicked. And that's the other argument, Lance, meaning that we don't want to punish children. So if somebody accuses somebody of committing if plotting witnesses accuse a innocent defendant of killing and they're found to be plotting witnesses, then they get the reciprocal punishment. However, their children don't get the death penalty. This is one halacha that affects the children as well. And then we brought up, well, maybe the children will be upset that their conspiring witness father is getting the death penalty. And we say upset is one thing, but halachic ramification of punishment to the children is another. So in other words, it's almost like saying that the father's committed to a death sentence and then the children are. In the case of how it halachically affects them. So here, not only is the Cohen affected being a conspiring witness, but his innocent children are. And whilst he is an innocent, his children are. So therefore, that's a problem to give the reciprocal penalty. So the Gemara says, okay, so maybe we can do a compromise. Maybe we can give the Eidim Zomimim the reciprocal punishment if they're Kohanim of stripping them of the Kohen status, but leave the children alone. In other words, it's measure for measure of what they intended to do to this witness. And the Gemara said there's a problem with that because rabbinically, you can't make added rules. Now, we do see cases where sometimes there are added rules to halacha, but it's generally a very rare exception, and it's within certain cases to help, which I'll give you an example. But one of the issues, for example, is that in Devarim chapter 19, verse 19, it says we have to do to him exactly as he planned to do. And this is going to be lacking because whether or not he emotionally had it in for the children or not, Lance is 100% correct. He planned to have this Cohen stripped of his status and knew it would affect the children. Lance is correct. He knew it would affect the children. And therefore, this, you would have to do it exactly the same way his children are affected because you can't override Deuteronomy pasuk. So we're saying then that the only way that you can do it where the children don't get affected and you don't compromise the pasuk, where you give them some of the punishment they intended to do, but not the full punishment because his children would be affected. We quite simply need to have another biblical source that's going to come up and say, when a reciprocal punishment is not appropriate, we apply lashes. And we're going to see further on in the daf where that applies and where the sourcing in. So Lance says no problem as long as there is, again, from the Chumash, a reason why if the reciprocal punishment doesn't work for whatever reason, we can apply lashes because we can't partially apply a pasuk of punishing him and not the children. So well done, Lance, on that yesterday. Um, then we said that that was the biblical sourcing of a proof. Now we have to do what you call sphora, which is logic. Are there any other reasons why we can't apply the issue apart from that verse in Deuteronomy? Just one thing. You have a case called a presbyl. Brendan, do you know what a presbyl is?
No.
So in the Shemitah year, which we're going to learn in the daf that's going to happen after 7 years, a debt is cancelled. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that's biblically laid out. And I'll give you the scriptural source, etc. And the rabbis came along and said, well, there's going to be a problem because if there's a needy Jew in the sixth year and his brothers don't want to lend money because they know that the debt's going to get cancelled and they're not going to get repaid, who is going to be punished? The poor and the needy, because they don't want, a person doesn't want to write off the debt, which they're not entitled to. So there's money that goes to tzedakah, and there's extra money where if you're short, but you can't, it's not your tzedakah quota, but you can help another Jew, but you need to get the money back because you're also battling with cash flow. There has to be mechanisms for that, and then this pasuk would end up cancelling all debts, and then at the end of the day, the poor would suffer. The presbyl doesn't negate that Chumash edict. What it does is that the debt is sold to the Beis Din or the Sanhedrin, at which they make it a collectible debt. So it transfers it where the pasuk is no longer applicable. Is that a fancy way to get out of it? Maybe, but the truth of it is it was done in order to help the poor. Lance, does that make sense what I'm saying about when we take, when the rabbis overtook a pasuk for certain extreme conditions within halachically bound mechanisms? Yes or no? Does it make sense, guys? Before I go on.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to go on. So,
Damon, a quick question for you.
sure, Kev.
The Zomamim, if
Yeah.
they found guilty of conspiring against innocent party, innocent Kohen, if the punishment is going to affect their children, what happens if it affects their family, their innocent kids? Is there another form of punishment that has to be sought out?
Exactly. And this is that's exactly the point. So it's balancing your answer and Lance's question. So Lance said, hang on a second, this terrible person wished to strip a Cohen of his status and knew the kids were going to be affected. He might not have hated the kids, but he knew the kids were going to be damaged. So why shouldn't his kids be damaged? You know, because he knew fits measure for measure. And the answer is his children are innocent, even if he's a cockroach of a person. And therefore, they're going to apply makkot. But the reason that they can apply lashes is only if there's a strong enough pasuk from the Chumash that makes it relevant to apply it when the reciprocal penalty is not going to be suitable for the innocent children of the plotting witnesses. Exactly that. Okay? So let's just cover a little bit of ground. We were saying that the second issue is an issue of a kol v'chomer, which we're going to go through now. And I just want to share one thing on the screen before we go through the kol v'chomer. And I want to bring this to Gavin's attention because Gavin's very smart. He uses ChatGPT, and Gavin, it really has amazing applications. But I'm going to show you an example of where it actually corrupts halacha. And you've got to be very careful about searching halacha through ChatGPT. Okay? So what we explained that a kol vachomer is a fortiori argument is you say in a case where there's a leniency and there's one particular part of the legal case where there's a stringency. If you've got a similar legal case where the whole uh, punishment or consequence is quite stringent, and they're similar in nature. Of course, if you apply it in the lenient case, the stringency, how much more so do you apply it in the case where it's a similar legal case and they're stringent on all matters? And then what the Dayu does is it comes to limit the amount of stringency so that you don't have a case length where you say, if there was a stringency in a lenient case, when you've got a case similar and all the factors are quite stringent in terms of consequence, this should be even more stringent. It says no. You cannot make the target area of the application of the stringency more than the source area of application. It's coming to constrain the stringency on some level. Now, I wanted to share something with you on ChatGPT when I looked at how to explain a kol vachomer in a simple way. I didn't explain it like this. In fact, what they did do is they actually corrupted halacha, and it's very important. I'll show you guys. If you learn nothing more from this, sure, you should be a little bit frightened of ChatGPT. You might, in fact, ask the gay reform rabbi and get a answer. Okay? Tell me when the screen is appearing, guys.
Yeah, it's
Can
up.
you just enlarge it a bit more?
I unfortunately cannot. I can't.
Okay, it's fine. Okay.
Can you read it or not really? I can try.
Yeah, I can read it. Yeah, I can read it.
I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
read it.
All right. Um, so it says if X is true in a less significant case, then certainly Y is true in a more stringent case. And it's giving you a straightforward example, which is terrible. Now listen to this, how terrible it is. If a person is obligated to observe certain laws in situations where their health or life is not at risk, then surely they must observe the same laws when their life is in danger. I'm going to repeat the error that they came up with. If a person is obligated to observe certain laws when situations where their health or life is not in danger, they should surely observe it when their life is in danger. Now look at the example. If a person is permitted to violate the Sabbath to save a life, Kal v'chomer, then it stands to reason that they should certainly be allowed to violate the Sabbath to save somebody who's more vulnerable. Now let's look at the top. What it's saying is, if you have to observe certain laws when somebody's life or health is not at risk, even more so when their life's in danger. Guys, we learn that you can break Shabbos if a person's life is in
Yeah.
danger. The reason being is so that they can get to live another Shabbos and keep all the halachas. So they're allowed to break that sort of, not for the three cardinal sins, because that putrefies their soul. No sexual immorality that's prohibited on a level like incest or adultery. No killing. One has to give up their life rather than actively kill somebody if their life is in danger. And one cannot do idolatry. Short of that, if your health requires, you can break Shabbos in order that you can continually do mitzvahs, keep kosher, learn Torah, and keep more Shabbos. This is saying the opposite. It's saying that if a person is obligated to observe certain laws in situations where their health or life is not in risk, then surely they must observe the same laws when their life is in danger. That is the opposite of halacha. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys? And I just got through this by
Yeah.
trying to explain the kol vachomer of how dangerous ChatGPT is.
So you know what? You might have got the correct answer if you would have added Orthodox, because they put it from all sources. So what happens is they can put it from Reform and Conservative. So try it again tonight and see if you type in there from Orthodox sources only. What? Give me an example of a kol vachomer.
So
I'm not saying
firstly,
it'll be right, but there's a chance.
certainly, Gavin, that was my consideration, and that's why my entry point, if I share the screen, said kol vachomer bava kama. Now, anybody that's learning but in other words, an il fortiori argument is a Latin term that can apply even to non-Jews, etc. That's why I specifically put the word kol vachomer. and now specifically put Bava Kama, so it's holding at a level where if somebody's learning it, then they're going to be at a stricter point.
I think there are some conservatives that do Gemara as well, not Reform. Reform,
Yes, they do.
Reform reads Enid Blyton and Noddy books, but conservative, there are conservatives that do Gemara. So try it again later, and then let us know tomorrow. So exactly what you did, add the word from Orthodox, exactly what you did from Orthodox sources,
Traditional sources,
and see
that, yeah.
see if they get it right. I'm not saying they will.
Okay.
But I think you've got a better chance. All right.
I'm just going to give Lance and Brendan and people that haven't done Bava Kama a couple of examples from my notes in Bava Kama of where you had certain monetary cases where a kol v'chomer occurred. If you don't mind, it will add clarity to those guys. If you guys that did Bava Kama can be patient, and we'll end this year early, but it's important that they know. So, guys, as you know, Bava Kama is a tractate of the Talmud that deals with civil law and torts. Not torts as in teach, but torts as in damages, actions, etc., and where you've got monetary mechanisms of compensation. Deals with liability, damages, and the application of civil law. Okay? So, uh, um, if you remember, when we did the Daf in 2a, it discusses this concept of an animal damaging property. And the Kol V'chomer guys, this will come immediately back to you. If someone is liable for damaging another person's property, they should certainly be liable when they harm the person in a more direct and personal way. In other words, if your animal is liable, if you are liable because you haven't constrained your animal from damaging somebody else's property, then when you use your own body to damage another person, for sure, even more so, you're liable. And the other extra payments that you have to make. Do you get what I'm saying? So, in other words, if it's one step removed where your property does damage and you're liable, even more so when you do damage. Okay, so the reason goes as follows. If a person is liable for damaging another person's property, and that involves monetary compensation, then when you do it yourself to the person's property, you're more liable. But if you bodily harm another human being, that's even a more serious kol v'chomer, at which you have to pay for humiliation, medical bills, the amount of time they're off work, their permanent disability, etc., etc. So that's in 2a. So in summary, Bava Kama uses various contexts to show that certain principles should apply more broadly or stringently depending on the seriousness of the case. And in other words, it always brings the lesser situation or one where you're slightly removed from doing direct damage yourself, and therefore it would logically extend to more serious situations or increased or emphasize liability when you're personally involved with it. Okay? So it's a key method of extending or amplifying legal principles on the perceived severity or importance of a situation. So this generally, whether you're dealing with civil law or cases of corporal punishment or any other negative commandment broken, it helps shapes it going forward. So you've got kol v'chomer is broken up into two words, kol. So kol would mean in Gemara 2a, if somebody who damages property is liable for compensation, in other words, paying the value of the property they damaged, then the chomer part is then surely someone who causes personal injury to another person, which is more severe than property damage, should be even more liable and should face a more serious form of compensation or punishment. So the idea is that personal injury demands a higher level. Okay? Then when we're dealing with an ox and a shore, let's just go to, instead of 2a, let's go to Bava Kama 8b. So let's look at the kol. So the kol is almost the more lenient part. So if a person's liable for damages caused by an ox or that was maybe lacking the right sort of supervision, the owner neglected or wasn't watching it properly, he should certainly be liable if the ox if the ox was more directively aggressive or violent. So that's the chomer part. The stringency is if the ox causes harm after the owner had prior knowledge of its dangerous behavior. In other words, a tum ox is a ox that damages without forewarning. But if it damaged 3 times, this is a different level. And instead of making half payment damages, it's full payment damages. Okay? So that was the chomer part. If there's
And remember,
of a
The
previous
muad.
aggression. Guys, let me just give me a minute or so. Sorry, this cat, I'm bobbing and weaving. It keeps wanting to come onto the screen. So in Bava Kama, guys, in 10b, there's a discussion regarding liability for damages caused directly by a person, like an individual throwing something, for example, versus damage that's caused indirectly, like actions of a third party, like your animal or your servant. So the coal here is if somebody's liable for damages they cause through their own direct actions, they break somebody else's vessel, for example, they certainly have to be liable for damages caused by their agents or their property, like their hired workers, etc., because they're working as extensionary agents for them. What's the chomer part? That since a person has less direct control over a third party agent, he's still held liable for the actions because that person is an extension of them, and therefore the indirect actions are caused because they hired a person and they should, or they've got the animal and they should have the right sort of supervision in place. So that's the chomer part. So it's then we've got in Bava Kama 29a a law of Garmi. So you've got Groma, which Gavin and I learned in death penalty cases. So that means you tie a guy up at the pier of the beach, wait for the tide to come in. And if the tide takes in, Hashem will hold you responsible and Shemaim for killing him, but the Beis Din can't. It's the same as when you hire a hitman because it's one step removed. Groma is indirect, Garmi is direct. Okay? So that's a murder case. But in this case, in 29a, a person causes damage indirectly. So in other words, it creates a situation that eventually leads to harm. And the coal part of it is if somebody is liable for direct actions they took that led to damage, that's the obvious part. The chomer part is then surely someone who causes harm indirectly by creating a dangerous situation or leaving something that eventually will lead to an accident, like a pit. We learned this with the boar. He should also be liable, although the damage wasn't direct. So, in other words, here the kol v'chomer is extended to liability even in cases where the damage is indirect but still traceable to the actions of the person involved. So, what's the logic? Is that if a direct action can lead to liability, then indirect actions that are traceable and preventable can also trigger greater liability. I'm just giving you one last one. And in Bava Kama 60b, I mean, I can go on and on. I just want to give you a variant. It's applied to differentiate between different types of damages. Okay, you've got fire damages and different circumstances. So what's the coal? The coal is if someone is liable for damage caused by regular means. Maybe their ox causes harm or their property is being damaged. They should certainly be held accountable if the damage was caused by something more dangerous, like a fire. Because what will happen is that your ox is generally not, it's tam, it's tame. You get the word tame from the Aramaic word tam, until proven otherwise. But a fire is naturally a damager. So the argument extends to say that since fire is inherently more destructive and dangerous, the level of responsibility and compensation should be even greater than when it's caused by less destructive means. But what is the dayu used for, guys? The dayu is used to basically say, listen, um, you can't have a greater stringency in certain cases. So there's a case where you have a kol v'chomer, and then you have a dayu, and not every kol v'chomer has a dayu. In other words, not every case where there's a leniency and there's a particular stringency, in a case where there much more direct stringencies, is it just kept to the same stringency as the leniency. There's only a restraint there in a lot of cases where the target area has to remain as strong as the source, but it's not automatic. Let me give you an example, Lance. If your property does damage and it's mindset like an ox or somebody that works for you, say you've got somebody that grafts for you and your next door neighbor, he doesn't like you, Lance, and he knows that the next door neighbor's got a Porsche and he keys the guy's Porsche. He knows you're going to be paying through the nose. So therefore, that is a level of responsibility where you're responsible, but not always to the same extent than if you keyed the Porsche yourself. Do you get what I'm saying? Because of your direct cognizance. So sometimes the penalty is greater, sometimes it's more lenient when it's one step removed. Sometimes when one physically damages, it's more so. So it's situation dependent, but there's generally a value to kind of limit it to its from a source application to its target. All right, guys, we're not going to go through the Kovachomer and logic in this case. I think we've done enough. We have to go to Mincha. Guys, was this helpful?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. I'm sorry about ramming you, Gavin, with ChatGPT, but it's not you. One has to just be careful.
Yeah, one always has to be careful. Guys that look up very detailed stuff on ChatGPT, Robert Sussman, he looks at specific verses and stuff, and he says it definitely makes mistakes. So the more detailed you go, the more remember, this is not written. I mean, this is written by superpower guys. You know, these are top of the range guys. ChatGPT is nowhere close to these guys, so you can't expect them to always return the correct answer. You have to be wary.
However, Gavin's got a good point. Gavin's got a good point, and that is the quality of the questions you ask in life is the quality of your answer. If you turn around and say, well, why am I always losing money? That's not a question. If you would turn around and say, well, what habits have I got where I've lost money in the past? That's more specific. ChatGPT is the same. When you say from an orthodoxy point of view or a Haredi point of view, what is the result of a Chol v'chomer? You've got to be specific, but it's not your be-all and end-all. All right, guys, let's end.
Also put their Jewish Orthodox, because they can start bringing in Greek Orthodox.
Yeah.
No, you have to be very, very specific on ChatGPT. Trust me, I use it all the time. The more specific you are, often your initial answer is very average, and you have to home in and kill it. Keep getting the question right.
But also remember ChatGPT getting its sources not just from the Jewish section, but also from the not so Jewish section. Trying to combine it to make sense. That's why sometimes it's the right answer also.
Makes sense.
By taking sources, turning them all over.
So I just want to wish you and your family Mazel Tov for the wedding.
Mazel Tov.
And may you only know sinful maids.
Mazel Tov, Nadine.
Only be blessed by Hashem and good things. All right.
And there's Danny.
Danny. I'm Danny's godfather. All right. And Arthur, I pray for your well-being and health every day because I can't keep a cactus alive. I don't know what after your son.
Kevin.
Yes.
Gavin.
Cactuses.
We've got to go, guys. We've got to go.
I wasn't cross with my words tonight, Gavin?
Yeah.